Should US President Donald Trump pardon diesel delete shop owners who have pled guilty for violating the Clean Air Act? This is an interesting question. Hey, it's Tim. Pickup Truck Plus as you talk. My friend Benjamin Walker shared the story with me. It's from Cowboy State Daily. It's a newspaper or online outlet, I should say, right next door in Wyoming, right over there. An interesting story. It's a Wyoming man in prison for removing EPA mandated filters seeks Trump pardon. His family's asking for Trump to get involved. His family is pushing for the president to pardon him because they see the changes that EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin talked about with greenhouse gas emissions. They see that as changing diesels. I'll get to more details on that. I actually had a lawyer reach out to me and provide some details, and I got even more facts to kind of go with what Lee Zeldin's actually proposing. But let's get to the story first. Here's a gentleman, Troy Lake. He had a shop. I believe the story goes, he had a shop in Colorado, and as I read it, and he moved back to Wyoming. But basically, he had people come to him. His business is called Elite Diesel, and he was, 2004. Their diesels were plugging up, and brand new trucks have a lot were having problems. He figured out how to delete the systems and get these trucks going. And his main primary business was working in the gold mining industry. That professional had a great shop, wasn't doing a lot of this, but then as he started leading these diesels, word got out, word spread, and he started getting a lot more business. At the time, he said the biggest problems were recirculating exhaust, the EGR system, exhaust gas recirculation. And so he's like, one of his sons says, like breathing in your own fart was actually a really good quote. So Troy Lake disabled these systems, and then word spread, and then he got more and more popular. And he invested a lot of money. He actually bought a $325,000 system. So he had an EPA test bench. He invested more money in research and development to get around these systems. And when DEF came out, he found ways around that, found ways around selective catalytic reduction filters. He just created this whole business. And they put $1 million in other sophisticated equipment, like engine and chassis dynos, and he had steady work from deletion technology. And then they had a raid. On October 18th, 2018, the federal government under Trump's first administration executed a search warrant on Elite Diesel Shop. The Lakes were actually at an Olive Garden, and they could see the footage on their phone because they had video cameras at the shop. They said it looked like a military operation. This is his wife, Holly, recalled. They had black SUVs converged, agents emerged in tactical gear, right for the business, the equipment, personnel files, everything. And then they were contacted by the government. The government and the U.S. Attorney's Office talked to them. And what they said was the government didn't know how they're deleting the diesels. And they were looking for like a sign. They wanted to know how they're doing it and how they could detect other diesels were having deletions. And then they wanted to know how they're able to rewrite the code to override the limp mode for the computer systems. So years went by, and he kept doing deletions. He's making about $2,000 per delete. He brought in roughly $800,000 by doing deletions. And word spread. He taught other mechanics how to do the stuff. There was a lot of back and forth in the interviews. They countered, as far as Holly countered that, they were doing things that were helping out small businesses. It was all about helping small businesses out. The big companies could absorb the costs of working on these systems. There's a quote later on the story that says, if you're able to repair these systems the way the government wants you to, it's like $27,000 per truck. It's putting small business out of business. And so, yeah, there was a quote by a local lifelong trucker who used them, who didn't know them, but he's like, yeah, we delete these things because it's too expensive to fix. Well, it caught up to this guy. He's went through court. He got a sentence of 12 months and 1 day, and he's in prison. He actually is working on diesels in prison. And he got a letter from a recommendation for a pardon from the shop person down there, the shop overseer. And it's like, he's a great guy. They love him. This is kind of a bad story, but here we go. So federal prosecutors reached out to get more information. So he's in prison. So he went away to prison. They had a call with him. Cowboy State Daily talked about what's going on. His quote was like, I wasn't trying to be like Robin Hood or anything. I was just trying to help people, and the word got all over the country. I could do it because that's a lot of it. That's basically was a lot of it. He just could do it right. Now, we're talking about this 2009 paper, the endangerment finding. This has got people really interested, and it says the agency rules are aimed at mitigating the hazard followed, and the people are saying that, hey, diesel exhaust is part of this. Well, that's not the case. And unfortunately, a new EPA administrator did not respond to Cowboy State Dealer Daily as far as the story. I'll clear this matter up. I'll take care of this section here. I'll explain what's going on with this. And then another gentleman said his truck caught fire. He almost lost the herd he was trying to transport. Luckily, Troy Lake was able to modify his truck and keep the truck on the road because he couldn't afford all the expense. He says, yeah, he decided to pay $3,000 to Troy to have him tune the engine, remove the emissions equipment, rather than spending $27,000 to make the truck right, like government wanted him to. And he had the customers. So then there was another guy. This guy's Levi Creech, I'm say it best I can, was a South Dakota based shop. He got sued as well, reached a plea agreement with the U.S. District Attorney of Wyoming, and he has 3 years probation, $20,000 fine, and $100 worth of community service and fines. He said the same kind of similar lines to what Troy Lake said. He says, all politics aside, it's extremely corrupt. These systems, they cause more harm for business owners. They make the trucks less reliable. But people are going to keep performing deletions anyway because the system is so hard on equipment and businesses. They did concede that curbing the exhaust particulates in a big city has value in big cities where people suffer from smog and inhalation. But when you're up in Wyoming, where they have oil fields, trucks need to be running every day, you have a problem because the trucks break down. So you have this city versus urban battle going on. And Troy Lake acknowledged the difficulty as well by saying, you see school buses stuck out in snowstorms in the middle of winter for 6-7 hours because the stuff quit. He says, I wasn't doing deletes out of malice. I think we all want cleaner air. But when you're putting people out of business, there's got to be common ground. Somewhere there's got to be common sense. We also have one of the more well-known people who got hit pretty hard is Corey Willis. His PPEI business, and I believe it's down in Louisiana, $3.1 million worth of fines. This guy was churning out tons of deletes. And he was also hoping, he's been on my Facebook page, also hoping the 2009 endangerment finding rollback was going to be a big deal for him. And it was going to help him in his court case that he wants to take back and fight out in court again. But he got his hands slapped pretty bad. So I got an email the other day from a lawyer who's been watching my videos, and he pointed out that the quotes I got were correct from SEMA and different organizations. But he says, Tim, you got to find the rule. And the rule was actually just published yesterday. So the rule is online. This is the rule that EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin talked about. This is the reconsideration of 2009 endangerment finding and greenhouse gas vehicle standards. This is where people are saying, I wish the EPA was more clear. Does this include diesel exhaust emissions or not? So here we go. This is the rule. This is the first document. I opened it up, and those proposed rulemaking, there's some drafts and things. So you open it up, and this is the Federal Register. If you've never read a federal document, you need a big cup of coffee. I've read these a lot over the years. But what I'm going to focus on is a couple things. I have some notes written down here, too. I want to make sure I get them down. Basically, I want to look at Section 3. Section 3 of this preamble describes our legal authority to rescind the endangerment finding and repeal the resulting greenhouse gas standards issued under the Clean Air Act, Section 202. Because this proposed action would not impact fuel economy standards and emission standards for criteria pollutants and hazardous air pollutants regulated under the Clean Air Act, we explain the relationship between these regulations to set the outer bounds of amendments at issue in this rulemaking. So let's be clear. This rule that it's discussing is to rescind the endangerment finding and repeal the resulting greenhouse gas standards. This proposed action would not impact fuel economy standards and emission standards for criteria pollutants and hazardous air pollutants. So greenhouse gas standards are going to be repealed. Does not impact fuel economy standards and emission standards for criteria pollutants and hazardous air pollutants. Let me go further. So page 10, this is part of section 3, and he says specifically, I wanted one more thing on drive home. We are aware that many manufacturers, importers, and sellers have already expended resources complying with greenhouse gas emission standards for model years 2012 through 2026, and the consumer prices for vehicles in these model years reflect the cost of such compliances. Because many compliance costs are incurred as part of research development and during manufacturing, with notable exemption of need to purchase compliance credits, this proposed action would have limited impacts on model years 2012 to 2024. Greater impacts for model year 24 to 26, it would entirely relieve future regulatory obligations from model year 2027 and beyond. So the proposed rollback of the 2009 standard is really going to impact 2027 and beyond. So again, we're looking at the page 3, that same thing. Go back to that one more time. We're looking at would not impact fuel economy standards and emission standards for criteria pollutants and hazardous air pollutants. Then we go to page 10 and we talk about how this is going to impact 2027 and beyond. So if you're talking about deleted diesels going back 2004, which this Troy Lake gentleman had done, or this Corey Willis had done, we're not talking about those because we're talking about 2027 and moving forward. We're talking about greenhouse gas emissions. Somebody go on to page 11. Let's talk a little bit more on page 11. Okay, it's right here. We are retaining and not proposing to reopen any criteria pollutant and air toxic standards for highway, light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles and engines under the Clean Air Act, Section 202A. They're not looking at reopening any criteria pollutant and air toxic standards for highway, light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles. So they're not going to work. We're not talking about criteria pollutant. So what is a criteria pollutant? A criteria pollutant, under the EPA's definition of it, are the 6 criteria pollutants are carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide. Particulate matter should be a key trigger word for you if you're a diesel fan. What are air toxics? What are hazardous pollutants as well? These are any pollutants with serious health issues. Okay. Then I searched, I said, what are the EPA criteria pollutant and air toxic standards? These are over 200 different air toxins. They include carbon monoxide, lead, ground level ozone, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. Then I said, do diesel emission systems reduce criteria pollutant and air toxics? Yes, because they work on particulate matter. The diesel particulate filters are highly effective in trapping diesel particulate matter, soot, which is a criteria pollutant. And they also work on nitrogen oxides, NOx, and then other criteria with the SCR, which carbon monoxide, which we talked about was one of the 6, carbon monoxide. So the EPA is saying in their proposed rule that Lee Zeldin put out that they're not going to reopen any criteria for criteria pollutant and air toxic standards. So the family is incorrect in saying that this Lee Zeldin is going to roll back this 2009. It's going to impact diesel exhaust. That's incorrect. However, I do have to feel for them here and wonder if President Trump is going to pardon them, because a 12-month prison term, when the other guy got community service, it seems like we don't have a standard for who's getting prison term, who's not, who's getting fined, who's not. I could see that as an argument. I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting and really timely with this week's news and diesel news, what's going on. So what do you guys think? Should diesel delete owners of shops who were not really trying to make the air dirtier, we're trying to save small businesses, and that's their viewpoint. That's their view. That's what they've said. Should they be pardoned, or should they not, because they were knowingly breaking the law? They knew they were breaking the law. There's no argument there. Tampering with exhaust systems on new vehicles is illegal. It's been illegal for years. They knew that too. Your turn. Comment down below. For more videos, check them up over here. Website down below as well. Pickuptrucktalk.com. As always, thanks for watching. I will see you down the road.